Okay, hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh. You forgot something, though.
Oh, I don't want to say that. I can't say that every time. I'm not going to do that.
Why not? Come on, let's just do it one time. One time.
Okay.
One time. Say it to his face. One time.
My name is Josh Knapp, and I am an Emmy-winning broadcast engineer.
See? It sounds perfect.
There
You'll
you
never
go.
have
You
to
got
do that
you got
again.
your once.
Yeah, I'll never make you do that again.
It is uncomfortable.
I'm not guaranteeing you I won't bring it up enough for me to say it again and again, but
Yeah.
you're off the hook.
I could use
Did
it
sound good,
as
though.
a weapon too. I could just say like, "Well, that's your opinion, but I have an Emmy." So, you got to watch out.
Please do. I hope you do that. Hey, did you ever see the Saturday Night Live when Susan Lucci hosted? And
Oh,
they
no.
did the skit where she, she was nominated like 14 times for the Emmy and never won.
Oh, yeah.
And they did the skit where she went to the cafeteria and like the cafeteria worker has an Emmy and the garbage man has an Emmy and they have this big Emmy fight. It was really funny. And she just stood there as gracious as she possibly
Aw.
could as they threw their Emmys around. And of course she couldn't participate because she doesn't have one. So it was clever.
I think Glenn Close probably knows how that feels, with her similar situation to Susan Lucci. There are many great actors and actresses who've never won an Academy Award. That's not really the only judge of an actor or actress's worth. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Well, the list is huge, and the list is impressive who have been nominated 6, 7, 8 times and not won. So she's in good company. I'm sure she would not like to be in that company, but
We could say that about Amy Adams, too.
absolutely. And somebody said, can somebody put Bradley Cooper, Amy Adams, and Glenn Close in a movie next year together and just wipe them all out at one time? And I thought, wow. And I was very impressed with the clip that they showed of Amy Adams during the Oscars. I just thought it was really sharp. I thought it was, it did a good job explaining what people might not have seen if they hadn't seen that film. And it definitely gave me pause. I was like, uh-oh. Some people have been talking about her sweeping in there at the last minute. Is this going to happen? And when you saw that clip, I was like, well, there's a possibility because look at what we just saw. But it was Regina King's night. Thank goodness.
Yeah, well, and yeah, it's definitely deserved for that. So what was your kind of overall feel about the Oscars, just in a little quick 5-minute, debrief? What'd you feel like?
Well, I don't have as much problems with the Oscars as most people do. I thought it was great that it was 3 hours and 15 minutes. They shortened it. It was much more of a ceremony than a variety show, and I've been saying that for decades. I like the idea of no host. I don't have a problem with the host, but, the bits and the ba-dum-tsh and all the selling of the cheese sandwiches under seats, it's a bit overdone. So we had a chance to show... They had a chance to show the world that it's not a necessity to have a host per se, or maybe if a host does appear next year, then they should keep it very simple. And they had a chance to make fun of themselves with Amy Poehler and Tina Fey and help me, Paul Thomas Anderson's wife.
Maya Rudolph. Yeah, she's awesome.
But so they made fun of themselves. I like that. I enjoyed the ceremony, but I always do, so I'm not really objective about that. I was happy with who won. Everybody thinks Olivia Colman was a surprise, and I can understand that. To me, it wasn't. There was just this instinct about her winning.
You called it.
I do have to say, I did because I felt it. And the other two possible surprises with A Star is Born winning Best Picture, and then I actually texted you later on that maybe it's not A Star is Born, maybe it's Bradley Cooper who's gonna sweep in there at the last minute and blow all the statistics out of the water and all the percentages and all that other stuff. I kind of just said that out of more hope than instinct, but the Olivia Colman was just a thing in my head. I couldn't get it out of it. From the moment I saw her do that speech in The Favorite about the rabbits, I believe I stated when we talked about that that's an Academy Award winning speech. And if she is nominated, that's the scene that they will show. That's not the scene that they will show. As a matter of fact, a lot of the clips were clips that they had already shown. And I guess they did that on purpose. Throughout the whole awards season, the same clip from Regina King. Doesn't matter how much or how the baby gets here. That's your grandchild. That scene's been shown over and over again. The Olivia Colman scene was shown over and over again. Different scenes from certain people, but the long and the short of it is I just had this instinct about Olivia Colman, and I believe, unfortunately, I'm sad for Glenn Close because I love her and she would have deserved it, but there was something just that much more spectacular for me about what Olivia Colman did. It was a comedic performance that wasn't supposed to be funny, and that's hard to pull off. And I will say this, I am 100% convinced that her acceptance speech is the best Oscar winning speech of all time. I never rewatch the Oscars. I have it taped. I hardly ever rewatch it unless it's something on Facebook or somebody makes a point about something, then I'll rewatch it. I have watched her speech 6 times just because I get such a kick out of how human she is. She's so vulnerable and so sweet, and she's funny, and it's self-deprecating at the same time. It's self-congratulatory. It's just wonderful. And how she kind of geeks out at the end instead of thanking God, she's thanked Lady Gaga. I love that. She's just real. She seems real. And the great thing about the speech is that anybody who hasn't seen that movie, well, one, now they're going to go see that movie, which is great because there's a ton of people who will see it because she won the Oscar, which a lot of people are going to be flipped out about that movie, which is great. But a lot of people don't even really have to see the movie. They're like, I love her just because of that speech. So if she won an Oscar for a movie, I'm glad because she's spectacular. So overall, I thought it was great. I am openly disappointed about Best Picture, but I want to make this very clear. Not for any other reason than the fact that the other, with the exception of maybe Bohemian Rhapsody, the other nominees just were more interesting pictures to me. They just were. Anything other than those two, they were more interesting films. And that is the reason why I'm not a huge fan of Green Book winning. They won. It is the best picture of the year. More power to it. I will say this as a side note. I have more of a strange feeling about it winning original screenplay than I do about it winning Best Picture, because I guess people just define original screenplay differently than I do. I think most people are defining it by it being an original story, but I actually take that full term original all the way to the nth degree. The idea of it being an original idea and then original for its own idea. So something like The Favorite, it fits into that category big time. So I'm not a big fan of it winning screenplay, and I'm not a big fan of it winning Best Picture, but for 2 entirely different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would agree with you kind of all the way down the line. It would have been great if something like First Reformed could have won Best Original Screenplay, something like that to give it some love. But it was great to see Spike Lee get his first I guess in competition Academy Award. So that was kind of cool. And I thought it was great seeing Alfonso Cuarón win cinematographer and director. And it just shows you how much of that of him that is in that movie. And I think, going back to what you were saying about original screenplay, like talk about an original screenplay. I mean, Roma is an original screenplay. The Favorite is an original screenplay. In some ways, Vice is, somewhat of an original screenplay. I mean, I think the First Reformed is definitely, I think it's ahead above the other films. In Roma's screenplay, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a nebulous thing because he was kind of changing and moving and adapting while the movie was going on, and nobody ever even really had a copy of the screenplay. So while they were in production, so I mean that's a kind of a nebulous term when it comes to Roma. But as far as Roma is concerned, I mean all that all the way down the line, seeing what Cuarón was winning, and then obviously winning the best foreign film. Yeah, I texted you and I was like, okay, so does this mean that Roma is definitely out of contention for Best Picture? And you were pretty much like, if it won, it would be unprecedented. So, it was a little kind of a jab to the chest there that saying that it's not going to happen, which in fact it did not. So, I mean, it would have been cool if it could have taken home both, but I think, you were probably right. If like Cold War won the best foreign film, then Roma could have, kind of gotten in there and really competed for best picture. But ultimately, I mean, there's the Netflix of it all. The Netflix, spent a lot of money on Roma and getting it out there, and putting it and other movies in theaters. Ballad of Buster Scruggs was in theaters. I mean, they Bird Box, I think, was in theaters too. So they were putting these movies in theaters, and now they've even gone from being a part of a more like internet-based internet-based kind of standards body to they've dissolved their relationship with that body, and they've now become a part of the MPAA, who does all the ratings and all that stuff for films. So they are trying to make themselves, Netflix is trying to make themselves serious in the movie going community. So, and this movie Roma, I think, helps to validate them. And I'm sure that Alfonso Cuarón was happy to take their money and make the movie he wanted to make. So, and it sounds like they stayed out of his way. So that's great. I think that it was a win-win for all of them. And we got the movie out of it. And it's so much easier for somebody to go to Netflix and access that movie than even having to drive to Redbox to rent something like The Favorite, which I'm sure, like you said, a lot of people will do. But, if people can, just tune up Roma and give it a chance, I think, they're obviously going to be, well, they will hopefully be surprised. So, yeah, I loved it. How'd you like the Shallow performance? Was it cheesy, weird, or was it?
I thought it was amazing, and I think it was amazing because of the way that they shot it. I wasn't expecting it to happen that way, and that was unique, and that was original, and at first I couldn't figure out what's going on. I thought they were going to commercial, and they were doing that thing where they showed the set changing.
Did you see how many people they had? There was like 20 people to get all that stuff out there.
Yeah, for two mics and a piano chair. Yeah, because they had to do it very quickly, and I understand that. And I am a child of the theater, so you see that stuff all the time on stage. I think it depends on how you do it. When the music started playing, I was like, "What's happening here? Are they going to tease it and then come back?" And then when they stood up from the audience, I was like, "Okay, it was beautiful.
Yeah,
it was really well done." And then you could tell that she was a little nervous, which I think is great, that the singer was nervous, but that's not her crowd. And I think she wanted to do such a great job. You could tell he was so confident that he didn't care either way. On some level, he still sounded a little shaky, but it was in the best kind of gritty, kind of groveling, kind of live vocal kind of way. And, it's not as polished as the movie version, but that's what made it even that much better. And then when they connected to each other and sat down, and everybody, of course, is speculating now that they're really going out in real life. I'm like, it's called acting, people. And they have chemistry. That's why it's a 5-time Academy Award or nominated picture. And that's why they won for that song, because there's chemistry. And then I found out he did all that. He planned out all that. He directed all of that. That was all his idea. And I was like, well, that's kind of an interesting way. And I'm sure he didn't mean it this way, but I kind of thought it was a good middle finger to the Academy for not nominating him as director, because look what I can do. Even in this 4 minutes of live TV, I can come up with an idea that is fresh and original. And the anticipation behind them singing that song was so high. I don't know how they could have topped what everybody was expecting, but they did, because of that idea. The fact that they stood up and walked up the stairs together was so smart. And I know he didn't do it to say, hey, middle finger to you for not nominating me for director, but it was a good little like, hey, you shouldn't underestimate certain people because they have the goods. And it was beautiful. And I love the fact that people are thinking that they're a couple or going to be a couple, and that he's going to break up with his baby mama. And I doubt that's going to happen, but that just says more about them performing that together and the power of that song and the power of them together, because that's all over that movie too. So I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I initially I was kind of like, "Whoa, this is weird," and then I kind of felt the weirdness. But then, once the song started kicking in, I was like, "Okay, all right, you got me." So, all right, so let's move forward because this is probably going to be a long one. We're gonna do each. We're gonna do each our top 10 favorite movies of 2018, and I say this every year. It's not the movies that we felt that were at least for me, it's not the movies that I felt were the best cinematic achievements of 2018. They are just the movies that I like the most and I want to see the most again. Very quickly, I'm just going to list off some films that are my honorable mentions, and then I'll let you do yours. So this also gives kind of a taste of like what didn't make the list. So for me, my honorable mentions are First Man, Avengers: Infinity War, Eighth Grade, and Black Klansman. How about you?
First Man. I'm surprised it didn't make my top 10,
Me too.
but it just kept getting bumped down. It's a spectacular movie. I'm glad it won visual effects. And I do want to say something about that really quick, because speaking of Avengers Infinity War, most people can't understand why that didn't win. And I don't know anything about um, how to make special effects. I have no idea. All I can do is sit as an audience member and try to figure out why this qualifies as the best special effects. And I think I figured it out for myself. First Man had to recreate things that we already know look a certain way. We already have pictures, we have film, we have it in our consciousness what those Apollo missions look like. We don't know what Thanos looks like other than the drawings in the comic book. They did a spectacular job. He looks real as hell, and I've seen that movie 3 times, and he really looks real. And his facial expressions are amazing, and they did an amazing job. But I think that's why First Man won its only Oscar that it was nominated for. It probably should have been nominated for more, but there's always a score. Definitely, that's the one everybody brings up. Claire Foy, they bring up. Best Director, Best Picture, they bring up. But there's always one movie that kind of gets shut out. That just happens to be First Man this year. Leave No Trace. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
I have seen it. It's good.
Yeah, really good. Deborah Granick, Winter's Bone, and then Ben Foster. You can't go wrong. And the young lady, I think her name is Thomasina
McKenzie. Yeah.
Thomason. Yeah. Yeah, she's spectacular. She's found another up and coming young actress and put her in the spotlight, meaning a main character in a movie, and it just flies. I'm fascinated with movies about people who just take off and go into the woods. I get it. Like, I'm fascinated by Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger, and how he just took off and said, nope, I'm done. I don't care about a second book. I don't care about being famous. I'm going into the woods. Leave me alone. I'm fascinated by that. Captain Fantastic was one of my favorite movies that year that it came out. I'm fascinated by that. So the whole way that movie concludes was perfect for me. And I was like, oh, that's exactly, I mean, you kind of see it coming about 15, 20 minutes before it actually happens without giving anything away. But it's a simple movie. It's just easy. There's nothing too complex other than how you feel about these two people who live in the woods. And I like that. It's not heavy handed in its message. So, Leave No Trace, Eighth Grade. There's something haunting about that movie, and I feel twofold. I can't wait to see it again. At the same time, I really don't want to see it again because I don't want to relive, but I do know how the movie ends. So I'm good with that. There's some movies that I'm satisfied with one viewing. And if I ever come upon it again and somebody else is watching it, I might watch it. But there are certain movies that I'm like, oh, I don't want to really relive that. And that sort of falls somewhere in between for me for Eighth Grade. Game Night. I liked it, right? It's a really fun. Yeah.
I forgot two of mine. One of them is Game Night. Like they were in a different spot on my list. So Game Night is one of them. It did not make my top 10, but it's like Black Panther.
Oh, okay. So you had that in
They're both
place.
Like, I've got a list of like, 1 to 15 or whatever, and they are like both right at 11. Fun movies. They're both great movies. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't go wrong with Rachel McAdams' performance. She's funny. And I'm a big fan of Jason Bateman, Jesse Plemons. He's just, what is he? Like, what is he? No, seriously, as an actor, what is he? What can't he do? First of all, he's played very normal, everyday men. He's played very odd, left of center men. Um,
Hmm.
I just saw this movie. Oh God, did I write it down? I just saw another movie with him, with Molly Shannon. I didn't write it
Oh,
down.
where he's her son or something?
Yes, and she's dying of cancer. And for the other people, it's called Other People. It's just his performance is so nuanced and it's so different than what he's done. I can't figure him out. There's nothing he can't do. He doesn't look like your everyday leading man, but he's the leading man in this movie. And then he does something like Game Night, and you don't want to look at him because you're afraid like you'll turn to stone or something. Like what's like he's just completely awkward. But then at the end of the movie, you have a completely different feeling about him. So it's sometimes movies with great performances can fulfill me. We've talked about this before, more so than the complete movie. Although this movie is fun and it's well done.
Game Night is one of those movies where like there's a lot of movies I go to and I have very high expectations and have a high standard. Game Night is a movie where I went to and had no expectations, and they surpassed what any kind of expectation that I would have ever had for a movie in that genre of that type, with those with those writers and directors and stars. And it's a movie that you can just like watch at any time. You can just like, if it's on, you can just keep watching it. You can put it on at any time. It's a really great movie that is I don't know, it just scratches you where you itch. And you got Kyle Chandler in there. There's the guy, you saw Maniac, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
you
I'm
saw it before
obsessed
I
with this
did.
guy. I'm
Okay.
obsessed with him.
Yeah, the Billy Magnuson, and I just read like 10 minutes ago that he's going to be in the new Bond movie because he worked, well, not because, but he worked with Cary Fukunaga in Maniac, and now he's going to work with him again in the new Bond movie, which, by the way, is going to have Rami Malek as the villain. So it's so cool. Love it. Oh my gosh, I'm excited.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with something like that. Yeah,
No.
there's something infinitely watchable about that guy. And he's shown up in a couple of things where I have kind of forgotten who he is. And then I'm like, that guy's great. Who is that? And then it clicks who it is. I mean, he doesn't really change the way he looks. It's just something about him. And he has the opposite thing going on that Jesse Plemons, and I'm going to try to say this in a politically correct way because I don't want to diss on Jesse Plemons, but Jesse Plemons looks like an everyday dude that you just see at the bus stop. You don't ever look at Jesse Plemons and say, oh, he's a movie star, which is spectacular that he is a movie star. And
Mhm.
that's to his benefit. I forgot his name all of a sudden. Billy Magnuson, he looks like a movie star, but yet he ends up doing these rich, textured, creepy, awkward, almost completely what Jesse Plemons should be cast as normally, but yet they cast this really extremely good looking guy and he is actually playing against his type. So it's fantastic that people are choosing stuff, actors are choosing stuff that you would not necessarily cast them in, and that's always a good thing for me because the good looking guy shouldn't always be the lead, and the average Joe, the everyday guy, shouldn't be the average Joe every movie. He should be the lead. He should be the most interesting thing. He should be the young ingenue in a film because those people exist in real life. So they need that kind of representation on film. So I don't know if I stuck my foot in it, but it's interesting to me because, well, the world of Hollywood is about, you know, typecasting and superficial looks and how good looking you are and that kind of stuff. And sometimes that hurts you. Sometimes that works against you. You can't get interesting roles because they perceive you to be too much of the leading man. And then the other side to that is that, they never perceive you as the leading man. So it's always interesting to me when the two switch. So my last one on my list, which I'm surprised didn't make my top 10, but it just didn't, was Mary Poppins. And here's the simple reason why. That movie should not work, but they pulled it off. It is as exciting and as electric as the original. She's as exciting and as electric as the original. The musical numbers are spectacular. Not just the music and the words, but the whole dance Pomp and Circumstance is amazing. It's designed beautifully. I'm surprised it didn't take some kind of technical achievement at the Oscars the other night, but at the same time, it was, in a lot of heavy categories. So the costume design is amazing. The set design is amazing. The production design, it's amazing. And I just had a really good time in that movie. And I felt like I learned a lesson. I felt like when I was 5 years old and Walt Disney came on and said, "Hey, you're going to watch Bambi tonight. And, make sure you listen to the message, treat everybody equally," whatever the message was. I'm sure Walt Disney never did that, but that's what it felt like to me as a kid. And it's always an interesting thing when you go see a movie as an adult and you can still, the movie allows you to suspend your disbelief regardless of whether or not you're good at that as an adult. I'm great at it. I have no problem with that. But, when you're singing and dancing your way out of the theater with your 81-year-old father, who is not a very good walker to begin with, and he's like twisting his cane around like he's got an umbrella, it's an amazing experience. And it's because that movie is so well done. That's why we had that experience. So, Mary Poppins.
All right, well, let's get into the meat of it. I'm going to start with my number 10. And this film is a film we have not talked about yet, but we will talk about very shortly, and it's If Beale Street Could Talk. And I am just amazed with the lyrical shots and amazing scenes that Barry Jenkins is able to get. I didn't know anything about James Baldwin as a writer. I have since learned about him, and it's really cool to see how Barry Jenkins kind of like, it's been interesting to see what Barry Jenkins and Damien Chazelle have done over the last few years with the cachet that they have from their successful movies a couple of years ago, and they both picked movies I think that were not the kind of middle of the road movies to go with. You've got Damien Chazelle picking First Man, which you're kind of coming at that from an interesting angle. You're coming at that story that's been told multiple times from an interesting angle. And you've got Barry Jenkins bringing up and giving the time and energy and resources towards an African-American writer that has had things to say when he was alive, and that has stories to tell. And it's done so beautifully, and the whole movie is just, the score is great. We've talked about the score briefly, I think last week when we were talking about the Oscars, and I think the cinematography, the shots that he's able to get. There were certain shots, like there was one shot of the two main characters, Fonny and Kiki, like walking away from the camera. It had just rained, and there's lights. They're in like in the middle of a street, kind of walking away from the camera, and it kind of reminded me as like a reverse of the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan kind of a front cover. I mean, just kind of, she's leaning on his arm, and they're just in love. I mean, it's a great portrait of young love and uncertainty, and the way that the story is told, the structure of the story is a little bit, it's not disjointed, but it's a little bit, kind of like in different sections. And we get to see amazing performances by not only the two main actors, Stephan James and Kiki Lane, but also by Regina King and, everybody else kind of down the line. Those, you talked a little bit about, Regina King in this, and she's, I watched this movie after, she had been starting to get some kind of play in the award circuit. And initially I was just kind of like, well, she's putting in, a decent performance, until that scene in the living room with Kiki's family, or what I guess with Tish's family, and with Fonny's family, talking about kind of the main focus of the film, which is that she's going to have his baby, and seeing how Regina King acts. Well, they even showed that in the Oscars. So seeing that scene, and then once again, just the scenes of her in Puerto Rico were just amazing. But just the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't want to steal all of my thunder from the next time we talk about this, is Brian Tyree Henry, who will come up again later for me, is is awesome. And he does one of those things. It's like the Ned Beatty, I guess, where he comes into a movie and he just like, the Ned Beatty from Network, comes into a movie and takes it over for one scene and then just leaves. And it's just jaw dropping. And the way that particular scene is shot, I can talk about it all day, but the way that particular scene is shot, it's a shot with Fonny and one of his great friends, played by Brian Terry Henry, who just gotten out of jail. He plays the character Daniel, but the shot, it's one of these like conversation shots or conversation scenes where it's supposed to be, you've got what you would consider like an over, where you see the person who's talking, and then you see a little bit of the other person who's in the conversation. And then what normal scenes would call for would be two cameras, and you just switch between, camera one, camera two, you're just whoever's talking, they're in the center of the frame. But what Barry Jenkins does is the whole time he uses a single camera, which first of all, it makes the scene very intimate, because it makes us feel like we're in the room with them and we're not disembodied. We're not switching back and forth between two cameras. And he also moves the camera slowly and purposefully. And sometimes somebody's talking who's not on screen, and then another person's talking who's not on screen. And the camera kind of like slowly tries to catch up to that. And it does give you, it kind of gives the audience, at least for me, it gave me a purposeful feeling, like, like the filmmaker is telling me, and the film language is telling me how I'm supposed to feel on top of the subject matter that they're talking about, which is very serious stuff. And so, I mean, just a scene like that is something that would get a movie to my top 10. So it's an amazing film.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk more about it when we do our podcast on it. But the one thing I will mention really quick, and we have talked about this before, is that, and I'll make a general statement about Barry Jenkins, he says more without saying anything than a lot of filmmakers in the last 20 years. And we've talked about this scene before when Regina King is in Puerto Rico and she's getting ready to go out for the evening. And she's getting ready for a very particular reason, a very specific reason. And she says nothing in that whole entire scene. She speaks not a word. And there is more in that one scene. And that has a lot to do with her and her Academy Award winning performance, but it also has a lot to do with how much Barry Jenkins trusts his narrative to be told in silence. And he did it in Moonlight, and he does it here. And it's spectacular. Didn't make my top 10 only because maybe it came out a little bit later and I saw it a little bit later. And my top 10 really didn't move too much. But it is a spectacular movie, and more to come on that when we do our podcast on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me mention really quick that we're going to do the same thing that we did the last couple of years, that if your number 10 is my number 5, then we're not going to talk about it until we get to my number 5.
Yep.
It gets a little confusing sometimes, but Josh is going to keep us on the straight and narrow. If not, we have a bet, and and hopefully I win because it's a really cool bet. But Josh is the technical person, so we should be okay. So my number 10 is Ready Player One. I said it when I saw it, and I still think about it to this day, even though it came out, in March of last year, or of this year, I guess. There's something just right about it. And yes, it's a video game movie. It has, a lot of 80s paraphernalia, for lack of a better term, in it. It's got eye candy up the yin yang. It's directed by Steven Spielberg. You can't go wrong with things like that. But it has this intense heart about it that March of 2008, late March, even though it felt like it was earlier. But it has this integrity behind it because the character wants to do the right thing and wants to figure out his mission and the adventure for the right reasons. And I've seen it a couple times since the first time I saw it, and it's as fun as it is the first time I saw it. I would like to see it on the big screen again. I don't know if I'll ever get the opportunity to. Maybe it'll come to the Dollar Theater at some point, but I think it's way past that time because it is such a spectacle, and it's so much to take in that it's kind of hard to see all the stuff on a smaller screen. But that doesn't stop it from having this integrity. And I like the whole idea of a bunch of younger people getting together and solving a mystery. And, we got Goonies, now we have Ready Player One, and the Shining scene is spectacular. And I like the idea of you going into a scene thinking you have to solve something this way, and then them figuring out that maybe that's not how we should look at it. Maybe this isn't the important part. And I think that says a lot about life. I think Spielberg says a lot about how we perceive young people and why we should be listening to people who are of a certain age, because they have a vested interest in these video games. It's part of their life. And obviously has higher stakes because the dystopian world that is created in this movie, the adventure has stakes and it has a purpose, and I like that. And I love the fact that the Ingenues, the love story, is as cliche as any love story could possibly be, but it's about two outcasts or two misfits, and they both have their reasons for feeling that way, and they're legit. I love the fact that when you figure out how all these other characters really are in real life, it's even more interesting to me that they come together and try to solve the mystery. It's just a fun ride, and it's really good looking. So, and what's his name? Ben Mendelsohn is in it. You can't go wrong with him.
That's true. Yeah. He's always a bad guy, but that's fine. I'll take Ben Mendelsohn as a bad guy any day. It didn't make my top 10, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it, especially the Shining scene. I mean, that scene's just fun to watch.
Yeah, I just saw a movie with called The Land of Steady Habits, where Ben Mendelsohn is the lead. Now, technically speaking, he's not a villain, but he is not a likable character. Edie Falco. It's an interesting movie, and he's very good in it. And he's not what you're expecting. You're expecting now that he's been the bad guy in almost everything that we've seen in the last couple of years. You're expecting the mustache being twirled and the hands being fingered and all that stuff. But this is different. It's a upper middle class story about a couple who gets divorced and their son is not doing well, and he's in his late 20s, and it's all about what happens to them and their friends. It's an interesting movie. It's not what you're expecting, and the fact that he's the lead is the reason why I watched it. Well, when I saw the trailer, I was like, I love all these people. Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that guy. Oh, I love her. Oh, I love Edie Falco. Oh, I'm good. And then you watch it and you're like, yeah, not what I was expecting, but in the best kind of way.
Oh, that's great.
So if you ever get a chance, check it out.
Have you seen Mississippi Grind?
No.
I haven't seen it either, but it's him and Ryan Reynolds. So, and I don't think he's necessarily like the bad guy, but they're both like, they're both like maybe not great people, but I don't know. So I just didn't know if that was something that you'd seen or not. Okay, let's move on to number 9s. My number 9 is a film that I think, a great way to describe it is that it evokes a feeling of uneasiness, and that is Suspiria. And this movie is not a perfect movie, but I think that the feeling that you get, the environment that is created by Luca Guadagnino, and the performances given by Dakota Johnson, Tilda Swinton, on down the line, even Chloe Grace Moretz, and Tilda Swinton again. They all give me a feeling that I just want to like be in that little world for a little while. It feels uneasy, but it makes me like, just the walls look different, and it just, everything just feels different in that film, and I love it. I just the way that they're able to actually use dance as a weapon sometimes, and to use dance is almost always accompanied with music, but even scenes where they're not even using the music, like traditional music, but in Dakota Johnson's scene where she's trying out her audition scene, there's no music, but she creates, like, with her body and breath and all of that, she creates kind of like a rhythm and a music of her own. And I think there's just like really great scenes in that film, and it's just so visually shocking in some ways, but then it's just visually interesting in general. So I loved it. Is that on your list?
No, it's not, but I
Okay.
knew it was going to be on your list, and I completely understand why. And once again, it just happens to be the film that just never made it. And it's not that it shouldn't be honorable mention. It's not that it shouldn't be in the top 10. It's that I remember back in the day, we used to do a top five. How did we ever do that? Like, what were we thinking? You know, like five films of the year. I couldn't do it now. If we did a top 25, it would be up there. If we did a top 15, it probably would have etched its way up there because I do think it's an interesting film, and I do think for all of those reasons, I double up on the fact that the acting is superb, the makeup is superb, and I hear that they're going to open the makeup category to 5 nominees next year. There's a possibility they're going to do that because we're always wondering, well, why didn't that get nominated? Well, there's only 3 nominations. There's a possibility they're going to open it up to 5, and if there was a fourth and fifth nomination this year, it would have definitely been nominated because you just can't tell. You, without saying too much, if people haven't seen that film, you cannot tell. You just can't. And even after knowing and going back and seeing it, I still looked to see the credits to go, no, that's not for real. And I had to focus on the name and names so I would believe it because I still can't see it in my mind's eye. Do I want to see that movie anytime soon? No, but it is, well, because it's no, it takes a lot. That movie takes a lot out of you. And, but it's really well done. I so get why it's on your top 10. Okay. So we're on my number 9, right?
Yep.
Roma.
Okay. We're going to talk about that later.
Okay. That's what I thought. Okay. So we're going to go to your number 8.
Yep. My number 8 is Steve McQueen's Widows. So I just saw this movie, rented it, and I think I texted you. I said, you need to see Widows. And it is, I don't know. Like when it came out in the theater, I was like, yeah, this is lining up. I think this looks like a fun, like genre movie that is probably more than just a genre movie because Steve McQueen decided to do it. And he got this great, female cast with a couple men in there, but this great female cast, and I didn't even realize what I was missing when it was in the theater. So seeing it, renting it and watching it, I was so bowled over by this movie. I mean, I know the capabilities of Steve McQueen and the characters and the acting in this movie is just great. I mean, from the top down, Viola Davis is awesome in this movie. Elizabeth Debicki has an interesting character that she's able to play nuanced, and I think she gets a little bit more to do than Viola Davis in some ways. So she's got a little bit more to grab onto, but they're both great characters and they're both very well played. And then once again, we'll talk about Brian Tyree Henry, and he's got a couple great scenes in there, and he's solid in that, and he's different than he's been in any of the other movies that I've seen or shows. I mean, the first time I saw him was in Atlanta, and since then I feel like I just can't get away from the guy because he's in a lot of stuff, and he's just knocking it out of the park in all of those. And also Daniel Kaluuya for me was awesome too, just haunting. The other thing that I love about this film is some of the unique camera angles that he's able to use, especially like cameras mounted to the cars that they use are great. And it's funny because this is it's a genre movie, it's a heist movie, it's a it's this, there's relationships, there's all these things, there's politics involved, there's all these things, but the way that he's able to tell the way that Steve McQueen's able to tell a story just by mounting a camera on the hood of a car and deciding when to pan it, that is really cool. And having single shots, there's some amazing crane shots and dolly shots that he's able to use that are just kind of like interstitial shots, but I think that they're purposeful. They give you a sense of flow to the story, and they are character driven, and I think that's amazing filmmaking to me, and it makes me want to go back and analyze the film even more, because I'm sure there's shots and scenes that I've totally missed that mean a lot more to the film or put in there purposefully that I, totally, didn't even see. But there's specifically a shot of, it's just a single shot, and it's just a car driving through town, going from one part of town to another part of town, a run down, part of town where Colin Farrell's character is wanting to be their alderman, and he drives to his part of town, which is so much nicer. But the whole time the camera's kind of like, you can't even really see into the camera, but at the very end it kind of pans over, and it's a great kind of character reveal that I didn't see it coming. And when it happened, I was like, oh man, you are so smart. So, and there's been a lot of those scenes in there where, you just have some great little scenes, once again, the Brian Tyree Henry character, how he seems one way or he acts a certain way, but then he becomes very menacing when he needs to, when somebody gets in the way of his goals. And so, I mean, there's not a lot of like redeeming characters in this film, but it's so interesting to watch, and I can't wait to see it again.
Well, first of all, that shot that you're talking about going from one part of the town to the other, where the camera's on one side of the car and then eventually goes to the center of the car and then goes to the other side of the car, that's brilliant. Never seen anything like that before. But on our top 10 favorite movies of the year, I don't want to spend any time saying to you what I didn't like about the film, because this is one of your favorite movies of the year. I definitely think we need to do a podcast on it, because I think this is our hell or high water for this year.
Whoa, cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well,
I'm excited.
Don't get me wrong though. You have to understand what I'm saying. You had a completely different view of hell or high water than I did. That's what I'm saying that Widows is for me. I have a completely different view of it. So once again, I don't want to spend any time talking about what I didn't like about one of your favorite films, but I definitely think we need to do a podcast on it, because I have some questions. So
Got it.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I see exactly what you're saying, but for me, I have a different point of view. All right. So we're moving on to my number 8.
Yep.
Black Panther.
All right, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I've championed this film for the moment that I saw it, and so did everybody else on film Twitter, and it deserves to have all the praise heaped on it that it had and has, and it's won 3 Oscars at this point, and I think it's won the best of the 3 Oscars that it was nominated for. Yes, it would have been great for something like this to win Best Picture, but for all intents and purposes, I don't think it's that time of the Oscar season. We're not quite there yet. A film like this needs to be nominated. A film like this needs to be recognized, and it was recognized. And I remember saying something about the production value of the film when they were in the mountains of Wakanda, and it was snowing, and they went to I forget what the tribe's name is now, and they had all those angular wooden poles, if you will, hanging up, and it led right into the throne room. And I was like, that is beautiful. Not only is that beautiful, it's kind of like a puzzle to look at. And the way that Ryan Coogler shoots it, it seems like it's much more complex than it really is, but then it is very complex how that's designed. And it is just beautiful how he has that center shot. They're going straight down as Angela Bassett and her daughter in the movie are walking up to the king of that tribe. It's just beautiful. So, and it won costume design. And somebody made it a point about that. They said she had to dream up what Wakandans would wear. And she did it with dignity and sophistication. And she used the history of Africa at the same time she created her own world. That's very hard to do, in my opinion. So the casino scene is probably one of the best action sequences in any of these superhero movies ever. The performances are outstanding. You could just go on and on and on about how great all of the leads are. Not to downplay that, not to specifically talk about anybody, but they're all just hunkered down in their performances. And then somebody else pointed this out to me somewhere in the last couple of days after the Oscars. Maybe it was a talk show host or something. They said it has its political ramifications, this film, but it's really a movie that is separate from what issues we normally put on to people who look like this in films. Usually the issues are about something else. They're there and they're important, especially with Killmonger. They're there. The issues are there, but they're not what this story is about per se. It textures the story, and it gives you insight to these people's lives. But really, this is about a king and his country, and the fact that this is one of the top grossing movies in the Marvel canon, and the fact that it is breaking a whole bunch of boundaries is important. But it's just flat out interesting and entertaining at the same time. You learn a little bit about something. They created a world that didn't exist before. You buy it hook, line, and sinker. So much so that when you see Infinity War, you're like, yes, go to Wakanda. Go to Wakanda. It has to take place in Wakanda. Of course it does. And when you see them and their shields light up again and their fortress gets surrounded by that dome, you're like, yes, we're in the safest place in the world. And that's because in Black Panther, they've established it. It's just spectacular. And it is one of those movies that, yes, I love comic book movies, and I love action movies, and I love characters dressed up in costumes. But there is something continuously calling me to see this movie over and over again. And I have to actually resist it. When I'm on Netflix, I have to pass by it, almost flip through it really quickly, like it doesn't exist. So I don't have that choice, because if I can't figure out what to watch, I will watch that. And I've seen it all the way through a couple of times, maybe 4 times, but I've seen it in spurts. Over the last year, I watched 20 minutes, watched 30 minutes. I'm like, oh, go watch something you haven't seen before. You've seen this before. And I'm like, but I can't stop watching it. It's just really well done. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy it too. It's great. And of the Marvel movies that I saw last year, I mean, that's the one that I've seen that one multiple times. Also, yeah, Avengers, Infinity War, but Ant-Man and the Wasp, I just haven't had a reason to want to go back to it. And I think that says a lot to the, how those movies, those other 2 movies were made, and being able to drop you into this fully formed world that, like you said, came out of the minds of all of these great, designers, and, the director, Ryan Coogler, and everybody working together for that singular focus. It helps to transcend what you might consider the limitations of a superhero movie. All right, my number 7 is The Favorite.
Yeah, we got to talk about it later.
All right. What is your number 7?
A Quiet Place.
We got to talk about it later.
Oh, we do? Okay.
It is on my list. So both of our number 7s we share with each other. Okay, my number 6 then is Minding the Gap. It's a documentary, and I spoke to you about it maybe a couple episodes ago. This is a documentary by Bing Liu, and kind of like a first-time feature-length documentarian. And it is about 3 guys. They all kind of got together, as like skaters, skateboarders. And the movie's not necessarily about skating. It's about them trying to find each other, or trying to find someone else, trying to find another family. Very similar to mid-90s, which we talked about, where these kids are trying to find other people to be with, to have a family with, because their families are lacking the basics of a loving family in certain aspects. I'm not necessarily saying that all of their families were absolutely horrible all the time, but it all kind of centers around domestic violence specifically, and they're all in Rockford, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago. It's a you can consider it like a Rust Belt type town, where it's industries that have left, and then jobs are harder to find. A lot of financial distress in the community, and at least these 3 young men have been exposed to, and have been victims of, and their families have been victims of domestic violence. And it's kind of them growing up over a period of time, and how they've dealt with it, how they've grown from young boys through adolescence, and then becoming men. It takes place over a long period of time, and it's very well done. There's some great skating shots and the way that they do those things, but really they do Bing Liu decides to focus on these two, his two of his friends, or two of the guys that he kind of like, runs with in these skating circles. And then ultimately the film starts to come back on him, which is always interesting in documentaries. And I don't feel like it was a forced choice on his part. I feel it seems like it was an organic thing that starts to happen in the film, where he starts to look back on his past, and they start delving into that as the film goes on. It's I think it's a powerful film, and it's not overdrawn, and it's not it doesn't look for things for easy emotions, and I really respect that. It's unflinching in the way that it deals with race, and the way that it deals with sexism, and the place of what inherently their each of their dads might have felt like their place was in the family, and what they felt like they were able to do, and how their parents didn't realize what it was doing to them as they were growing up. So I mean, I think it's a great documentary. It's on Hulu right now, so I mean, if you have Hulu, you can watch it, but it's awesome. So yeah, you should definitely check it out if you haven't.
Yeah, I've never heard of it before. I mean, obviously I should because of the Academy Award nomination, but yeah, I knew nothing about it. What is it about skateboarding that brings out these crazy, interesting family stories? I guess maybe when somebody finds something that they're interested in and unites them with somebody else. But it seems to be skating has this, it's like surfing, which I guess no surfer would say was similar.
Sure.
No, well, yeah, I'm wondering if the people who skateboard would say that though, and if surfers would say that. But I guess in a way it is a board and you are surfing and you're on two different,
No, but I think it's about the community. It's not about the physical thing.
Yeah.
It's about the community that you're seeking. It could be Magic the Gathering. It could be Dungeons and Dragons. It could be, anything. It could be sports. It could be just, like baseball or something. It doesn't really matter. It's the, enveloping yourself in something to either get away from your home life or to search for other people that care about you, and care about you in the way that you feel like should be cared about, I guess.
It's interesting to me. Yeah, that's definitely going to go on the list. So that's good. Thank you for opening my eyes to that.
All right, you're number 6.
BlacKkKlansman. I can't stop thinking about this movie. I can't wait to watch it again. Somebody said the other night about the Oscars, there's no way to be objective. You can only be subjective about movies. I believe that that's true. And my subjectivity towards Spike Lee is, I think he's brilliant. And I think he's one of the most interesting filmmakers of all time. And I've thought that for about 25 years. And I stated that very clearly. But there is something spectacular about this feature that he's created. Somebody pointed out in an article that he kind of twists and turns the truth to fit his narrative, which people have had complaints about Green Book doing. But for some reason, the way he does it, he ends up telling a story and creating a narrative that has a much more poignant, for obvious reasons too, because of the subject matter, but it has a much more relevant significance to the race issues. That's an obvious statement, but he does it in such a way that you're almost not aware of it, even though it's in your face. And there's something about the way he tells a story that is unique only to him. He's an auteur. His performances are stunning. It got Adam Driver a nomination. To attempt to put Denzel Washington's son, and I describe him as Denzel Washington's son on purpose, into a film. And, that could have very easily gone one way instead of the way that it went. But John David Washington's performance is so hunkered down in believability, even though he has to do almost unbelievable things. And we talked about listening to his voice as if he was the white guy, because he presents himself as a white guy over the phone. And that's how I really realized he was Denzel Washington's son, because he sounds a lot like Denzel Washington. But I could also believe that this guy could have gotten away with what he got away with. and then that lends itself to a great little bit at the end. And then he does the one thing that I was expecting to see, but wasn't expecting to see it where it happens. And, that's that shot at the end as they're coming down the hallway, and they're on some kind of dolly.
He calls it the double dolly. Yeah, that's what
that's what he
calls it, the
yeah.
double dolly. So I guess one dolly for the camera, one dolly for the talent.
Yeah. And he does that in almost every one of his films. And he does some interesting things in Jungle Fever where he flips the characters upside down. I think we talked about that on our podcast. And it's just interesting filmmaking and interesting storytelling and the tension that builds up in that film. And it's not just for the obvious reasons. It's not just because we're talking about the KKK and a radical group of black people and a black policeman in, the late 60s, early 70s. We're not talking about that is what creates the tension. That tension is automatically there, but that scene with the car at the end is amazingly tense, and people get their due, but it doesn't go the way you're expecting it to go. And I like that. So for him to get an adapted screenplay and finally win an Oscar is thrilling. He could have very easily won Best Director. He could have very easily won Best Picture with this movie. It's just great. I loved it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. All right. My number 5 is Mission Impossible Fallout. So this movie.
I knew it.
This movie, I was trying to think about like how I could describe this movie, and or just pretty much like the last couple of Mission Impossibles. Like it seems like first of all, they have it figured out. Like Tom Cruise, Christopher McQuarrie, they have it figured out, and the movie's kind of like a comfy blanket or something. It's like I knew this is a movie where I had high expectations going into it, but they weren't like high expectations for like cinematic genius. It's just I wanted to be wowed, and it did it. And I'm a huge James Bond fan, and it's getting to the point where like I'm really excited about the next James Bond movie, but I think Mission Impossible is creeping up there. Like whatever the next Mission Impossible movie is, I'm getting just about as excited as I am about the next James Bond film, because ultimately, yes, people have said, yes, it is our James Bond. But I think that they've tapped into a formula. And I know that in art, a lot of times formulas can be considered bad or can be considered rote or uninspiring, but their formula evokes emotion from the moviegoers, and me specifically. It evokes emotion from me, but it's usually like just wonder. And they have a tenuous way of tying it together, and they try to make, character choices, and they try to, get these actors to really act out certain emotions. But ultimately, I don't think that's why. Well, it's definitely not why I love this movie, but that's not really as important to me in this movie as, going from piece to piece, going from situation to situation, and figuring out a way for them to kind of tie all together and just move forward. And it was such an exciting film to watch, and I've watched it multiple times, and I'm excited about it every time I see it, and I can't wait to see it again. So it's my number 5.
I can tell you this. I follow people's top 10 lists, and it's on a lot of people's top 10 for this year. And one person put it, I think, as succinct as you possibly could. They did it again. How did they do it again? They've topped themselves, but they continue to do it again. And how can, after all of these films, this be one of the most interesting one of the bunch? And it's, how many is it now? How many is this?
6.
6? That's amazing. I rewatched it with my dad, and it's just a fun ride. And the things that he does, that whole motorcycle chase sequence is ridiculous. It's probably one of the best chase sequences of film of all time. And it doesn't end the way that you think it's going to end. It ends exactly how you always think those things are going to end, and they never end that way.
Yeah.
But this one does. So for that, kudos to that. All right, so we're moving on to my number 5.
Yep.
Are you sure?
Of course. My number 5 was Mission Impossible Fallout. Your number 5 is?
Dang it. First Reformed.
All right, let's talk about it.
Yeah, yet another one. From the moment it started and it became something that I had no idea it was becoming, It was a subject matter that I was not expecting it to be. You think it's about one thing and then it's completely about something else. And the points that they make about that subject matter, and I don't want to specifically talk about what that is because I think you need to learn that as you're watching the film, because I think that's important. Because if I say it's about this, I think people might be turned off of it just because they're not expecting what they've seen of the image of Ethan Hawke and all of the priest outfit and all that other stuff. They're not expecting what you're getting. And that to me is impressive. A way of talking about a subject that people want to talk about, but putting it in a world that you're not expecting it to be in. Fantastic. And it has this mystical kind of strange thing that happens closer to the end. And at first I was like, well, where did that come from? I think they should have alluded to it at least some other point, but then they didn't, which was good because you needed it just for that one scene. And Ethan Hawke, his performance is outstanding. It possibly should have been nominated for an Oscar. It's hard to say. It should have been nominated for the Oscar because the 5 people who were nominated were nominated. And I think we've talked about this when we were talking about our Oscar, during our Oscar cast. I think people are afraid of that performance for a couple of reasons. It's so quiet and so reserved and so unnerving because he's writing in a journal and he's one way and he's acting a completely different way as the priest. And then he has another character that he interacts with that he's a completely different person with, but yet he's sort of similar. It's unnerving. And I think people are afraid of that movie. And it was great to see it for original screenplay. And like you were saying in the beginning, it is definitely original. It's definitely unique. It is not what I was expecting it to be. And for that reason, I can't stop thinking about it. And it was not a hesitation to put it on the list. It just arrived. And once it was on the list, it stayed in the same position too. I haven't really altered any of them, but there's just something so unique. And I will say this, 1, 2, 3, 4, my next 4 films, if people watch them in a row, they might be a little unsettled in life. So I'm not recommending you watch every one of these movies in this order because they are unsettling. From BlacKkKlansman to my number 2 film, they're all like, they're not easy watches. And this is not an easy film to take in.
Wow. For me, that movie, like I will see that movie again, but I think I talked about it a little bit last week, but I feel like I am not prepared. My filmic grammar is not prepared enough to get out of that movie what Paul Schrader put into it. So I need to do some more. I need to do some more homework before I go back to that movie. So yeah, there's something about that movie that it. I don't want to say it scares me, but I feel like it is. It needs to be dug into deeper, and I don't think I'm ready for it yet. He's working on a different level, I think. So, all right. So your number 7 is my number 4, A Quiet Place. I saw this movie in the theater, and it was a great movie going experience. Everyone was so respectful in the fact that it was at Alamo Drafthouse and people had food, but like nobody ate because it was just absolutely silent for most of the movie. And it was great. It was a really cool environment to see the movie. And so I thought that was awesome. I thought it was much better than seeing it at home, which I've watched it multiple times since then at home. The sound design of this movie, the amazing things that that John Krasinski and all of his teams were able to do with the sound in this movie really, I think, helped to elevate it for me. And it's it's one of those like worlds that I want to live in. We talked about it. Well, not want to live in, but one of those worlds I want to dip into, like Suspiria. Like I want to just see what's going on in that world for a little while and then jump out. This is another one where I love the kind of like near future dystopia type stuff anyway. Like one of my favorite movies of all time is Brazil. So, I mean, that's my cup of tea. That's my, right down the middle of the plate for me. So, this movie what is a great, cool concept. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone episode, but just kind of like stretched out and fleshed out with great characters. And, everyone's got their own motivations. Each of the kids have their own things to go through and their own things to reckon with. Emily Blunt gives an amazing performance. And I mean, did she win the BAFTA for this?
No, she won the Screen Actors Guild.
Screen Actors Guild. That's right. Oh, Olivia Colman won the BAFTA, right? Was that like
for Best Actress?
For Best Actress,
Best Supporting Actress went to Rachel Weisz.
Rachel Weisz. Okay, gotcha. All right. See, that's why it's good to have you here, because I forget all that stuff. So she has an amazing performance. I mean, just her birth performance in that tub, which, listening to some subsequent interviews, that was like first take. I mean, they're just like, she's just like, just knocking it out. Like, all right, well, what are we doing after lunch? Like, it's amazing. They're amazing performances. The design of the monsters was, unique enough to where it doesn't look too manufactured or rubber stamped. The design has a purpose, like a physical purpose, like as far as the physics are concerned. So I thought that was really cool. And I guess they're making another one. So, I mean, I don't know what I necessarily feel about that, whether they need to make another one or not. But if everybody else is kind of coming back and everybody's, on the same page, it might be interesting. It does seem like it was like a little quick movie that they made, little passion project type movie that they made, and it came out amazingly. So.
I agree 100% with everything that you say, so we don't have to go through all of that again. I do want to reiterate Emily Blunt. She's amazing in it. I do believe she could have garnered an Oscar nomination. It's ironic that she won the Screen Actors Guild. It was the only thing that she was nominated for, and Regina King wasn't, and statistically speaking, that put Regina King in a very strange world. But she is now the second Oscar winner to have debunked any of those statistics, meaning Regina King won without having the Screen Actors Guild and or the BAFTA under her belt. But I think it's important to note that when somebody wins an award that's not nominated for anything else, it should have gone to Emily Blunt, and it makes perfect sense that it went to her. Yeah. She's amazing. The only reason why I don't have an issue with it being a part 2 is because he had already had an idea after the filming of the first one how a part 2 would happen. So that was already in play. So it's not like everybody said, oh, it made this amount of money, which I'm going to point out that in just a second too. He had already thought about what would happen to these people past this point. And so because everybody is coming back, that's the reason why I'm okay with it. But the movie does feel complete. It doesn't feel like it needs an extension of the world, but I am curious how they are going to extend the world, and I have faith in these people to do it properly. That movie cost $17 million to make. In its opening weekend, it made $51 million. In the United States, it made $190 million. Worldwide, it made $332 million. Let me repeat, it cost $17 million to make. They made that amount of money worldwide because it's an extremely well-told story. You're right, the monsters are dead on. At first I was a little disturbed by them because I was like, what is happening? But it makes sense why they were designed the way that they were. The effects work. He uses as much practical effects as he does CGI, which I think is important. The sound effects are amazing. The sound design are amazing, and that's purposeful, and that's character driven, and that's always going to win out for me. It is one of the best movies of the year. The fact that it didn't get at least a sound design or sound mixing nomination is a surprise. Yeah. But at the same time, once again, the history of the Oscars is very interesting in the fact that there's always a film that gets left out. It happened to be First Man when it comes to all of the big ones. But this is one where you went, oh, wait, that CGI effect didn't get nominated. That sound design didn't get nominated. That performance didn't get nominated. Okay, it's one of the films that just got left out. In retrospect, when people talk about this year's Oscars, years to come, it will be one of the films that they mention. How could they have overlooked this film? And it will lead to somebody else being noticed because they're going to say, oh, 15 years from now, they're going to say, oh, this reminds me of John Krasinski's A Quiet Place and how it got shut out. And then that film will be nominated because nobody wants to repeat that mistake, if that's what you want to call it. So for that reason, here's the thing. What Guillermo del Toro said about whoever wins the directing Oscar, remember your film will be the same film you made tomorrow as it is tonight if you lose. It will be the same film, and you should be proud that you made that movie because it's not going to change the movie just because you didn't win Best Director or Best Screenplay or whatever you were nominated for. It still sits by itself and stands by itself. And A Quiet Place definitely stands by itself. So,
All right. You're number 4.
sorry to bother you.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I figured.
All right. My number 3 is A Star Is Born.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we're getting into the upper echelon. Your number 3.
Is The Favorite, which was your number
7.
Here's the thing. It is one of the most unique experiences of the year. It is like nothing else. And there's a lot of films on my list and on your list that are unique amongst themselves. And sorry to bother you, First Reform, Black Klansman. These films are unique. Suspiria, they are unique. But for whatever reason, and I believe we are saying Yorgos Lanthimos, and I believe it's Yorgos Lanthimos, which is what I've been hearing. So I'm going to probably flip between the two, but I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I keep hearing Yorgos Lanthimos. So hopefully I'll say it correctly. It took me the longest time to learn Yorgos Lanthimos, so who knows? It takes me a while, but Yorgos Lanthimos, see, he is one of the most interesting visionaries of our time. That man can tell a story like no one else. His attitude and disposition that he creates are like nothing else. And this film just completes that on so many different levels. And just because it became this mainstream, finger quotes, big finger quotes, hit, and it garnished all these awards and all these nominations, does not make it any less strange than it is. It is a very left of center film. The performances are stunning. Academy Award winner Olivia Colman. It is one of the most unique performances of the year. And I think that really rang bells for people. I think people were probably as much confused about how she got away with what she got away with and how in depth she went. And that rabbit scene is the scene that just is the most emotionally interesting film or interesting moment that she has. But the other stuff that she has to do is just, it's just odd, and it's just left of center in the best kind of way. And you can't slight Emma Stone. You can't slight Rachel Weisz. You can't slight anybody in this film. It's a unique take on a story that I didn't know anything about. I didn't know anything about this queen. So to actually see it in this light is a new and adventurous way to watch something. People are calling it a historical drama, which I think is kind of funny. Because it's based on a historical figure, and these things about her are apparently more true than not. And the way that it's shot in those long fisheye hallway shots are amazing, and the way it looks. And I have not seen it all the way through, but I have seen it enough to say it is a black and white costumed period piece. We talked about that. I think at the time you didn't even realize that they were mostly black and white. There's some burgundy in there too, but it's mostly black and white. Everything is black and white. I find that fascinating. I find that, you have that exaggerated long cape that the queen wears, and it kind of gets in the way. And you have the reality of a queen that's a handicap, and that she's not functioning on the same level because of her physical deformities, if you will. It's just keeps going. It just keeps going. And everything that Olivia Colman is given to do has purpose. She stops that dance sequence, which is one of the most unique dance sequences in a movie ever, because she realizes, and that great shot of her, that up close shot of her, she realizes she can't dance like this. She'll never be able to dance like that. But at first, you're not sure why she's so angry and upset. And then it kind of starts to filter in. And when she is walking by the window and they're playing music out in the courtyard, and she makes them stop because she realizes it's making her emotional, it's just like nothing else I've seen. It's just amazing. It is one of the most creative films of the year and one of the most unique. And that's saying a lot, because there's a lot of unique films this year. It's amazing.
I'm not going to add too much to that. I'm just going to say, like, I mean, just in writing down a couple things about this movie, like I just wrote bold, funny, and off kilter. And I think those are good descriptions of individual elements of this film. There there are things that about it that I see it as a black comedy, and I think a lot of people see it as a black comedy as opposed to a drama. Now there are definitely serious parts, but it doesn't shy away from from bold scenes, and there are laugh out loud funny parts, but there is those camera shots, those extreme wide angle shots, they're purposeful in a way that gets the audience to, it puts the audience in an awkward position. It's forcing you into an emotion, an awkward emotion, and a kind of, like you said, left of center emotion and left of center viewpoint. And so that, I mean, once again, I mean, that's just using the toolkit that you have, using lighting, costumes, lens choices to get that to happen. I mean, I know, that's a benefit that filmmakers have that, theater directors and plays have to fight against. Like it all has to be like on the stage. Whereas in movies, they've got the shortcut of being able to put a 7mm lens on their camera and say, like, well, I know this is completely surreal, but that's where I want you right now as a moviegoer. So, and Yorgos Lanthimos, or however we want to say his name this week, is adept at doing that. So, all right. So we're now to each of us our top 2 films. My number 2 is your number 9, and it is Roma. So for me, I feel like in Roma, we're transported to a place and a time that are both foreign to me, but they're made familiar by the interactions of the family at the core of the film. Cuarón chose to shoot it digitally, chose to shoot it black and white, or chose to compose it in black and white, and it allowed him to make frames that look like still photography. I mean, it looks like he's taking pictures of these scenes or of these situations, but at the same time, he's not afraid to move the camera around. It makes you. It seems kind of like, to me, it seems kind of voyeuristic how he sets his camera up in a lot of the scenes, but at the same time, we have so many intimate scenes in the film, and a lot of that, I think, has to do with either him deciding not to move the camera, or when he does move the camera, he uses either simple pans or 360-degree pans, or dolly moves along a track where it's just straight along a road. Or, I mean, obviously the single shot that he does close to the end of the film, going out into the ocean. It's kind of like more traditional motion, and it's not it's not anything that, there's not a lot of steady cam, there's not a lot of like handheld, too much of that. It's very formalistic, and I haven't even started talking about the sound design, which I think is maybe, I know it seems insane, but it might be more important than the visuals, because this movie has the greatest sound design of any movie I've seen this year. It is inherent to the understanding of where you're at, what's around you, what it helps to signal emotions in the film, and it is integral to it made me, like, it rekindled my my joy for surround sound, and just in general for my joy for the capabilities of a film, and how a film can use sound to interact with the audience. I also think that Cuarón himself, having the ability to start from scratch with this movie and go from being able to have this singular vision from front to back. I mean, to the point where he's shooting his own film, he's editing it, he's producing it, directing it, he's doing it all. I mean, he's like, I mean, I know So does this, but I mean, he's doing it. And this is stuff that like indie filmmakers do because they have to, and he's doing it even though he has the ability to bring in people like Emmanuel Lubezki and other people. I mean, it obviously didn't work. He would have worked with Lubezki, but you know, it just didn't work time-wise. But he's able to take this singular vision, even something that he wasn't even giving out the whole script to people. It was all in his head, or, you know, in his mind, and he was able to realize it. And that's amazing, especially considering how difficult it is to make a movie, period. That's why it's my number 2.
And I agree with everything that you said, and we had a great podcast about it. I don't know why it was number 9 on my list. It just happened to go there, and I never moved it, and things just kind of piled on top of it. It has nothing to do with the quality of the film. I do want to say this about this. I want to get this kind of off my chest. There is a backlash that happens with films that become popular and become award worthy and start to do the award circuit, and then people start to watch it and people are saying that it's boring and that it's slow and that nothing happens in this film. And what I encourage people to do is to try to understand that a film has a language all its own. Now, I'm not talking about the specific language of people from Mexico speaking in Spanish. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about English. I'm not talking about a language. I'm talking about how a film needs to be heard. And of course, by what I'm saying is how you hear it and how you see it are kind of the same thing. I'm not necessarily talking about the sound design. I'm trying to make a point here by saying this film has a specific voice, and we need to, as an audience member, learn to adjust to the voice of the film. And I was lucky with this movie because when you see the dog poop on, that's an elegant thing to bring up about a brilliant movie, but you see it in the beginning of the film and it's very still shot, and you see it a couple of times and you're like, why does he continuously shoot to this pile of dog poop on the ground? And you soon learn that you have to listen to this film very specifically. You have to watch it in a very specific manner, that the film has a voice, and he's trying to tell you with these opening shots that things are going to be purposefully paced and everything is a visual metaphor. And the fact that this family has this strange little garage or hallway that the father eventually comes home and tries to park in, and he can't really fit, and he has to go across the car to get out of the car. He is saying to us as a filmmaker, this is not a place where this man belongs. He does not want to belong here. There is dog poop on the ground that they don't take care of until they ask the housekeepers to take care of it later on. The kids play around it. They're sweeping around it. They're taking care of their daily chores around it. So obviously something is not right in this family. Something is not going correctly, because who allows their walkway of their house to be filled with dog feces? Who does that? So the filmmaker is trying to say to you, listen to this differently than what you would normally listen by seeing, is what I'm saying. Look at this differently. This car does not fit in this garage on purpose. These dogs do this because of this reason. It's all a visual metaphor. And if you allow yourself to hear what the filmmaker is trying to say through these visual metaphors, the movie just sings. And then when it gets to those epic moments with that mob, and then the forest fire, and then the beach scene at the end, it's so intense because you have adjusted your viewing to the sounds of this movie. And I guess it's apropos that I'm saying sounds, because you were talking about the sound editing and the sound mixing and everything, like the sound design. I'm dying to hear it on my headsets while I'm watching it on Netflix. That's my next goal, is to eventually get back to that film and then to hear it on my headsets, because I think it'll be a great journey that way. So people just need to lend themselves to what the filmmaker is trying to say versus what they think should be happening in a movie. You know, not every movie's going to end up with T'Challa on top of a car fighting somebody in a casino scene. It's just not going to happen. So you have to allow yourself to adjust to what the filmmaker wanted to say. And if you can do that, this is a beautiful movie. And I think in retrospect, when people finally 10, 15 years from now, and it always happens, the one movie that just got away, and this is the movie that got away this year when it came to the Oscars, when people look back on it and people have adjusted themselves to it.
I mean, it did win Best Foreign Film.
It did win Best Foreign Film, it did win Best Director, and it did win Best Cinematography, all well deserved. But it's like Ang Lee winning for Brokeback Mountain and Brokeback Mountain not winning. There's a lot of things that are tied up in that, but a lot of people thought Brokeback Mountain was boring. And it's because not a lot of things traditionally happen that you're expecting to happen in a movie, I guess. I don't know what you're expecting to happen. But when you lend yourself over to what the filmmaker's trying to say, it becomes cinematic art. It becomes this literal motion picture. Like like you were saying, it looks like a still, black and white still. It looks like he's created black and white photographs and or paintings, and then all of a sudden they move. Brokeback Mountain does the exact same thing. And people have come to understand that that film was speaking a different language at the time, regardless of the subject matter. Roma is going to be the exact same way. For all of those people, the masses who didn't understand this movie and said it was so boring, it's because they're not giving themselves over to what Alfonso Cuarón was trying to say. And when they do, oh my gosh, it's just beautiful. It is a beautifully acted film. It just sings. And I will say it one more time. He made black and white look like color. I don't know how he did it. And some black and white films, you can see where the color is supposed to be a certain color and stuff like that. But in particular, that last sequence on the beach and the sun is in the background, you can feel it, you can see it, you can sense it, you can see the beige color of the sand, you can see it reflecting off the water, you can see her eye color in that. It's just beautiful.
All right, your number 2.
Is your number 3 A Star Is Born? I will never get over this movie. I just won't. I saw it again and I just won't ever get over it. That shot in the beginning when she's walking down the alleyway after she throws the trash into the garbage and she's singing, and then A Star Is Born comes up on the screen and she's dead center of the shot. If you listen very carefully, and it's so fun to hear a movie a second time, especially on headsets. And I watched it on my computer with headsets because I wanted the music to be loud. You can tell instantaneously she's a star. And he makes that point immediately because she's singing that little song. I can't even remember what she's singing, but it's so beautiful and she sounds so great. You're going to have no problem believing that she is a star waiting to be born. Speaking of music, I will say this over and over again about this film. The music that's in this movie literally doesn't make sense to me. Here's why. It is so perfect that it seems like these songs have been in our consciousness our whole entire life, and we've never heard them before at all. That Black Eyes Open Wide song in the beginning, I think it's called Black Eyes, is the song. That song sounds like I've been at a concert and heard it, and that I actually have seen Jackson Maine perform it on the Grammys or something. It's in my consciousness, even though it never existed before. It is one of the only films, and it's a completely made up movie about rock and roll, that the music sounds as legit as the subject matter needs it to be. That's unheard of. Usually, these songs are good and some of them are really great, but they just don't quite fit into the film, but they're really great songs. It's just, the music is perfect. And what he chose and how he chose to film those and take the chance of going 8 minutes on a stage for Bonnaroo or wherever he was, Glastonbury, and they couldn't hear him in the audience, and they certainly weren't going to play it because of YouTube and all that other stuff, is incredible that he still got those performances out of all of those people, including himself. It seems so genuine and so real. And I am a huge fan of Bradley Cooper and have been since I really discovered him for myself, which was in Midnight Meat Train. is where I really went, who is that guy? Like, what is this guy? I've seen him in a couple things, but who is this guy? This movie is odd. Why is he in it? Like, isn't he the Wedding Crasher guy? He's like the douchebag from Wedding Crasher. How is he in this film? And then, of course, Silver Linings Playbook came into my life, and then the rest is history. But there's not a split second I don't buy into the fact that he is an aging rock star who's been famous for about 15, 20 years, and he's over it. Not for a split second. And then on top of that, what he chooses to do with his camera choices, we've talked about this, that bar scene when she sings La Vie en Rose is beautiful. And then I watched it again, and his performance is stunning in that. And that red and that vibrant color and the way that she kind of bends over backwards and then kind of slowly looks at him, but really doesn't focus on him as she starts to get up. It's just filmed extremely well. And then I noticed a second shot that blew me away. There's a shot, and I think we talked about this on our Oscar podcast, where Sam Elliott and Bradley Cooper, brothers in the film, are sort of arguing over wearing earpieces. And there's a shot of Sam Elliott from his right-hand side, and then the camera goes up and kind of angles towards Bradley Cooper, but then it stops and all of a sudden comes back and goes around the back of Sam Elliott. Usually shots like that pull me out of the film, but it was as if the director was saying, pay very close attention to what the brother is saying. It's as important as what you think the scene is about. It's just well done. And there is not enough time or podcasts or anything to talk about how exquisite Lady Gaga is. She just is on point. And for me, it's not the musical numbers, although they're great. I can't get them out of my head. Once I hear them, I cannot stop hearing them. It's the small things in that movie that she does. It's that small moment where the lady in the grocery store takes his picture and she's like, sorry. And he goes, it's okay. And she goes, it's not. It's really not okay. And then when she punches him, the cop in the cop bar is amazing. It's the small moments. I'm never going to get on that bike with you when you've been drinking. Now go downstairs and wait for me. It's amazing. Those small moments, and I know as an actor, they're hard to do. And she just flies. And last thing I'll say is Sam Elliott. It's so great that he got his Oscar due. Yes, he didn't win, but that's okay because you're right. And you said this on the Oscar cast. That shot of him pulling out of the driveway backwards is 30 seconds of acting heaven. If I could have a second of that myself, I would feel like my life was complete in a different way. And his moments are all like that in that film. But that one particular moment, that must have been so rough as the cameraman. Like, I could not have held that camera. I would have just wanted to hug him. Like, dude, I get you. I feel you, man. It's just a beautiful movie.
Well, I agree with everything you said. And for me, I was trying to figure out why I haven't been able to shake the movie. And I think that it once again plays towards some things that I lean into. It seems like it's easier to express emotion with songs. And I love movies about music, or movies where music is, well, last year, my number one movie of the year my favorite movie of the year was Baby Driver. I mean, they're so inextricably linked, the music and that film. And in this one, it's very similar. I think it's also easier for a filmmaker to evoke emotional responses from me specifically when the characters are using music to express themselves. And that's why those scenes, like the performance scenes, are the ones that get you to connect. I mean, there were very few times when I've, cried at movies, especially in movie theaters, but this movie was one of them because of the emotional. I mean, Steph was right next to me. She was bawling too. And just seeing emotions laid bare so raw, it's music gives people the ability to do that in a genuine way, and it just so that's why it's my number 3 and your number 2. My number 1 you probably know it because we haven't talked about it yet, but is Sorry to Bother You. So this movie for me, I mean, I saw it twice in the theater because I knew I missed a bunch of stuff the first time, and I've seen it since. But I mean, I own it. But this movie it makes me think that like nobody ever told Boots Riley that he couldn't make this movie, and so he just made it. Like we have he has the ability to make this movie. He got people interested and involved, and we get to see Lakeith Stanfield, play the main character, and we get to see Tessa Thompson. I mean, like it is a great kind of like shoving together of all this talent, and it's so unique. It is, to me, it's the most. It's the most unique film of the year, and maybe of a few years. I don't know. I mean, it does share similarities with my number one movie of last year, Baby Driver, in that like nobody's really done that before. And I think with Sorry to Bother You, I mean, you could compare it to Brazil, something like that, where it is that kind of like somewhat dystopian near future, very near future in this case, alternate, barely future in this case, of Sorry to Bother You, where I mean, he goes at he talks about ambition, about culture, organized labor, performance art, class and class structures. I mean, to the point where he's doing representations of class and representations of American history by using horse-human hybrids. I mean, he goes for it, and he's not scared to push the audience, and he's not scared to have outlandish characters on the fringes. The Armie Hammer character, and have high concept from the very beginning. High concept elements to the film. I mean, it's ostensibly a movie about a guy who gets a job at a call center, but it's about so much more, and you know that from the very beginning. And I love how it is a self-contained piece that gives the audience it gives the audience satisfaction at the end, but it also brings up a lot of questions and asks what we could handle as a society. And I don't even necessarily, I mean, I don't agree with Boots Riley's politics. I mean, he is very clearly Marxist, and I'm not a big Marxist guy. So, but that doesn't mean that I can't be swept up in what he's trying to do and how he's trying to bring the things that he thinks and the opinions that he has to an audience in a unique and surreal way. So I love this movie, and I can't talk to people about it enough, because I don't talk to everybody about it, because it is once again, it's a unique, surreal film that I think a lot of people would just completely turn off without question. But I think that if you're willing to kind of push yourself a little bit, then I think you do get a lot out of this movie. And it's a fun film, and it's funny, and it's weird, and the production design is great on it. It has a lot of practical effects. It also has CGI, but it never detracts from the point of the film. So I thought it was great, and that's why it's my number one.
Well, it happened to be my number four, just because it fell that way, but I have not stopped thinking about it since I first saw it. And I think when we talked about it, I said it's going to be one of my favorite movies of the year. And if you had said and described the movie to me, and I had said, oh, that's going to be one of my favorite movies by the description, it would be not a match. So for it to end up being one of the most interesting films, and talk about original screenplays, and talk about just the idea of originality, unique, weird, off-centered, left of center, all those terms just don't sum it up. It is original. It has a voice of its own. It has a lot of little voices inside of big voice. It's almost as if you're hearing thoughts from somebody's head versus a traditional narrative. Although it has a traditional narrative, sort of, although you're not expecting it to go where it's going, but if it didn't go where it went, then something would not feel right. And he does not pull punches. He has the biggest set of kahunas of any filmmaker nowadays. He just does, dude. He should wear them on his shoulder. Like, he should just flap them over, because how people are not putting this on their top 10 list surprised me. Some people did, some people didn't.
I know.
Some people said it was one of the most interesting films of the year, but yet it just didn't complete. Something wasn't complete for them. And I get that, but it is just super unique. And these type of films normally are interesting to me and are fun to watch. And I sort of don't get it. And I sort of have to scramble to try to figure it out. And then I have to do a lot of research. This movie just had a voice that I was able to listen to. Maybe 10 years ago, I would not have been able to hear it as clearly. I'm not sure I got half of the things that he was trying to tell us about, but I definitely felt what he was trying to tell us, teach us, enlighten us when it came to his storytelling. It is one of the most unique stories I've ever seen on film. It's a shame that we have to say something like, well, it's not something I would recommend to everybody because, it is so unique and people blah, blah, blah. But it goes back to the same thing I was saying about Roma. You just have to listen to what the filmmaker's trying to have you hear. You have to hear it for what the filmmaker wants you to hear it for. And I know it gets really surreal at the end, but if it didn't, would it really complete the picture? Would it really complete the narrative? I don't think it would. And for him to go there, and for him to go there as far as he does, yes, we have horse people, but we have completely anatomically correct horse people. And if it wasn't like that, something would be missing. No pun intended. I don't mean that as a joke, but it would be something missing, because that's part of that joke, is that, there's a reference to horses, and usually it's a
we get positive.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know how to say it politically correctly. And like if my mom was listening to this, would I be able to say,
I will say that the surrealism at the end is hinted at very soon at the beginning. I mean, there's a scene where he gets dropped in, as he calls people, he gets dropped into their living rooms. And so right there, like, you're not like feeling like once the horse people get introduced, or the concept of a horse person gets introduced, you're not just like, wait a second, this was a straight-laced film up until this point. No.
Yeah,
this
you got
movie,
a point.
like, brings you along. So, and if people are listening to this and haven't seen the movie, it's got to be confusing, but it all makes sense. Just believe us.
Well, it makes sense when you're listening to what Boots Riley wants you to hear. And I'm not saying, like I said, I think I missed 90% of it. I can't wait to see this film again. And I look forward to seeing this film again. I look forward to understanding what I might not have the education on understanding at this point. I might not have the language to describe what I'm seeing, but I can definitely feel it. I just think it's very brave to actually not hold back on any level. And he does not hold back on any level all the way. The thing about the anatomically correct horse people is as important and is as vivid as her earrings, Tessa Thompson's earrings. They're that bold and that big. They make a message and a statement, and that's obviously a much more right in your face statement, her earrings, because they say stuff. But there's also a sequence when she's doing that performance piece where it's as anatomically correct as the horse people are later on. That stuff, when all that stuff is getting thrown at her and all that other stuff, it is anatomically correct. If it did not happen the way that it happened, it would not have worked as well. And it was one of the most confusing parts for me. I didn't really understand it, but I did feel it. I did sense something from it. I did have an emotional understanding of it. And that to me is everything. And if it wasn't for the fact that you're right, no one told him no. And sometimes that's a bad thing. Having somebody tell you no, don't do that. Don't put that at the end of your film. It's not working. It doesn't make any sense, is a good thing, because people are not good at self-editing sometimes, or editing their content because they want everything they need to say. He did not hold back. He said everything he wanted to say and more. There are all those subjects that you talked about, but it's interesting to me that film, I am none of those people. but I am all of those people because I have worked in the telemarketing organization, and I have understood that there are people who are at a position and power to manipulate my life, physically manipulate my life. And it was interesting to me that I'm watching these type of characters in this type of film, and I'm going, I can relate to you. So it is infinitely interesting to watch that movie. So it's a good number one. It really is. I'm not surprised. As a matter of fact, when you said we'll talk about that later, I of course deduced that it was your number one by going, wait, there's nothing else left. But if you had asked me if Mission Impossible was on your list, that would have been an easy yes. If you had asked me if Sorry to Bother You would be your number one, I would say, oh yeah, of course. That makes perfect sense. You're a little bit of a weirdo, by the way, when it comes to movies.
Well, thank you. Well, can I deduce what your number one is? And I think I can. So I'm going to guess.
Go for it.
Annihilation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
One of the best of the year. No doubt about it. I've seen it 3 times. I'm possessed by it. And I use that term on purpose. I read the book. I think I'll read the book again. I can't get it out of my head to the point where I find myself drifting off to sleep sometimes, and I start thinking about that movie, and I'm going, what brought that up? What in my day represented that? I didn't see it on Redbox. I didn't see it on, we watch a lot of movies, and we read a lot about movies, and it was just the Oscar time. And some people had this on their top 10 list, which I thought was great because I thought it went missing for most people. And it did go missing for most people when it came to award season. But it's once again the movie that got away. But what is it that keeps drawing me back to it? And then somebody on Twitter downloaded the scene with her and the alien, for lack of a better term, at the end of the film where they're kind of struggling together. And they said, is there a better scene in a movie this year? No. And I was like, and I watched it again, and I'm still convinced I'm right about that scene. I'm still convinced there's a switch. I'm still convinced of it. There's no evidence other than a feeling. Okay. And I will say this without saying too much. Oscar Isaac comes out of The Shimmer different. So why wouldn't she? I'll just leave it at that. You know what I'm talking about. Most people who haven't seen it.
Oh yeah.
And this is a film I would recommend to the general going populace, movie-going populace. Yeah, it's not that surreal, although it has its surreal elements, but it's more sci-fi surreal, so it's a little bit easier for people to accept. Natalie Portman is, I mean, she's just great. It's your man, Alex Garland. He's got a disposition and an attitude about sci-fi that makes it seem like it's not sci-fi. It just makes it seem like a movie with these elements that cannot be defined other than calling them sci-fi because we're comfortable with that. But are they? Are they sci-fi? Do we know where that came from? Yeah, we see something, but it's really not determined what it is. Same with Ex Machina. It's sci-fi because it's about a robot, but is it really about a robot? Isn't it about human nature? Isn't it about what we're willing to do and accept as human beings and what we don't allow other human beings to do? Which I guess is what great sci-fi is. So as a genre, you would call it sci-fi, but it goes above and beyond that. Annihilation does for me. I'm possessed by this film, and Gina Rodriguez is the one Oscar nomination that I would have liked to seen come out of nowhere because she is warranted of this nomination. It's one of those performances that I didn't know she had that in her. And when people look back, it will be the performance of the year that people went, why wasn't she nominated for the Oscar? Was she nominated for the Oscar? That it's going to happen. And she's had some new movie come out. I can't remember the name of it. But she got a lot of critical acclaim.
Miss Bala, Steph and I went to the theater and saw it. It's not great, but she's really good.
Well, I did notice on that press tour, people mentioned Annihilation, and people were like, you're really great in that. Like, nobody specifically said you missed an Oscar nomination. And once again, I have to state for the record, it's not the end all be all of the thing in movies that you get an Oscar nomination to warrant a great performance, but it is a stepping stone, and it is a career builder for actors, and it puts people in a different light, and you see people in a different light. it will be looked back upon as the movie that got away, especially production wise, sound editing wise, sound mixing, and supporting actress. It is just infinitely watchable for me. The way that they create that shimmer, I want to go in it, but at the same time, I don't want to go in it, especially after knowing what's in it. But then what's in it is so beautiful. How did it not get a production design nomination? It seems impossible to me. They created a world that is based on nothing but their imagination, based on things that could possibly happen if the scenario happened. And those human figures that grow, beautiful. It's stunning. And that figure of that guy who cuts himself open and he's splattered up against the pool, the wall of the pool, is fascinating. And it's the one still shot that every time it comes up on Perfect Shot on Twitter, I retweet it because it is one of the most interesting shots of the year. So I find it fascinating on some level that you guessed it, but at the same time, I have not shut up about this movie all year round. So it is just, I challenge people to watch this movie because one, I think it's one of the most interesting movies of the year. For me, it's my favorite. And two, I want it to garner some kind of cult following so they make the other two books, because I think that would be interesting. I think they need to continue on with the story. And they kind of leave it with a semi-cliffhanger, but enough to where if they don't ever make part 2 or 3, you have enough to think about for the rest of your life. And boy, I cannot stop thinking about it.
That's great. For me, I don't really. I think you said it all. I think for me, it did not make my list, but I am interested to go back. But I do love that kind of hard sci-fi stuff. But for me, for whatever reason, it didn't make my list. But I'm interested to get back in there. There are some of those scenes that were just so arresting. I mean, the scream bear, whatever you want to call that thing, like it is
horrible.
That was one of the most tense scenes, most tense times I've just felt so tense in a theater. It was one of those times. That and A Quiet Place, like those were the ones when I'm just like, you're just sitting in a theater and you cannot do anything but kind of wriggle around in your seat, and it's those evoking those emotions. That's some crazy stuff. And you're right, Alex Garland, he's the man. I will see anything he does. I mean, it seems like he's got a good handle on what he enjoys and what he wants to bring forward, and having a movie that is that is led by, it's essentially all women. I guess you do have Oscar Isaac in there, and they're all, unique. They all have different characters, that are etched out, and they're dynamic, and you really care for them as they're going through this. So I think that it's a great film. It's a good pick for your number one. So, all right, that's 2018 right there. I mean, we're done with 2018. Now we get to see amazing films of 2019, a lot of which have not come out yet. Because I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go see a movie this week, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't have one I really want to go see this week.
Yeah, I had the same problem. My father hadn't seen Aquaman, so I was like, okay, that's an excuse to see it again. And you know what? It's much better a second time. I enjoyed it a second time. I kind of followed it this time. The first time I was like, this is so loud and so over the top and so bright. I can't what's happening here? But it's actually it's got a pretty interesting story. I mean, for that world, them having to unite the 7 realms and blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah. It was fun. And he loved it. And he has an interesting take on movies. They have to really grab him, but he is not. We saw it last night, and it was another fun experience. And he was like, I like that. He woke up talking about it. He woke up he ate breakfast talking about it. So for that reason alone, it was fun to see a movie that I never thought I'd see in the theater again. But it is what it is, and it's ultimately just fun. So that says a lot about what's going on with movies right now. There isn't really anything out, and
Yeah.
it's right after Oscars and stuff like that. So it's going to be an interesting year. There's some interesting things coming out, but a lot of people didn't think 2018 was that great of a year. Everybody says that every year. I don't understand it. I thought this year was spectacular.
Me
There were
too.
some really great movies out there, and the eclectic list of what was nominated for Best Picture says it all. I mean, it says it all,
Mhm.
regardless of what wins or what ended up being somebody's favorite. It was an eclectic bunch of films. So that to me says a lot about where we're going with filmmaking. They're going to give 10 years from now, it's going to be even crazier with how many different films we get. So I like 2018. I thought it was a great year.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, we will do this all over again next year. So, but in the meantime, we've got a bunch of movies coming up that we've got ideas for doing podcasts on. One of which is If Beale Street Could Talk, which will hopefully be our next podcast. So, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You can tweet us at actorengineer, and we'll see you next time.